Good morning, Torah lovers. Welcome to my learning of the first two prakim of Mishna D'mai in honor of the memory of Lea Andersen, who passed recently. And a group of us are collectively learning the whole Mishnah before the end of her Shloshim in her merit and for the uplift of her soul. So today, we're looking at what I think is a really interesting Mishnah. Oh my God. Good morning, Bran. It's so good to see you. And you're our first person that you can actually see who said something in the chat. That's really exciting. Okay, today is a really interesting Mishnah, I think. Having just looked at it 2 minutes ago. Again, I don't learn these in depth before I do these live streams. I just take a look at them as part of my text prep. So, yesterday, a little bit of Chazara. Yesterday, we saw this is the first Mishnah of the second chapter of D'mai, and we saw that, me too, we saw that there are, these are kinds of produce that you always treat as you need to tithe them again, no matter what. So, meaning if you get these kinds of produce from an Am Haaretz, who's someone in general, we're not so sure that they're holding, they know the rules, but we're not so sure that they're actually holding them. Which is the kind of situation we find ourselves in, I think, frequently, not about tithing agricultural produce, but about other kinds of observance. Wow, my phone is ringing. I will go mute that, sorry. Okay. Okay, so this is the first Mishnah where we get information about ways in which we treat D'mai as if it has definitely not been tithed, or has not been tithed, not definitely, but hasn't been tithed, and we treat it that way. Most of the first chapter was about ways we treat D'mai as if we kind of think it has been tithed. Or ways in which the doubt that we have leans towards leniency instead of stringency. So here we're getting a stringency. Let's see what the second Mishnah has to teach us. Hamekabel alav lihiot ne'eman. So I'm going to say this seems to me to be the title of this Mishnah. Hamekabel alav lihiot ne'eman, meaning an Am Haaretz who wants to take it on themselves to be trusted by people of rabbinical circles who are holding strictly by Ma'asrot. Someone who wants to be trusted so that their produce is not considered D'mai produce. Interesting question to think about. Why would someone want to become Ne'eman? Why would someone want to become trusted like this? We'll just bracket that question. Okay, but this mission is about someone who wants to become Ne'eman. Ma'aser et shehu ochel. The person who wants to be considered trustworthy in terms of tithing has to tithe everything they eat. Ve'et shehu mocher, and everything that all the produce that they sell, they have to tithe it. Ve'et shehu lokeach, and everything that they purchase. Ve'ino mitareach etzel am haaretz, and this person cannot be a guest, meaning eat meals served or prepared by other Amei Haaretz. So this is all the stuff that they have to do to become Ne'eman. You might think that in order to be Ne'eman, all you have to do is tithe what you're selling, because that's actually the stuff that we of the rabbinical elite, or like rabbinical circles, would be concerned with. That's the whole concern of D'mai. If you buy produce from an Am Haaretz, do you need to tithe it yourself, or can you trust that it's already been tithed? But in addition to just having to tithe what they sell, you also have to tithe what you yourself eat, and what you sell, and what you buy. And you can't even eat food with other Amei Haaretz. So there's a lot of additional stringencies that it seems like we're asking an Am Haaretz to take on if they want to be trusted in terms of whether they're tithing their produce or not. In a certain sense, so like why all these extra stringencies on the ne'eman? Okay. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, af hamitareach etzel am haaretz ne'eman. Rabbi Yehuda says, even someone who eats at the home of another Am Haaretz can still be trusted. Fascinating. Amrulo, they said to him, meaning the majority of the other sages said to him, Alatzmo ino ne'eman. But he's not being like consistent, maybe is the best way to translate ne'eman here. He's not being consistent in his own practice. He's not being faithful to himself about eating only tithed produce. Ketzad yeheh ne'eman al shel acherim. So how could we trust them when it comes to how could they be reliable when it comes to other people? They're not being reliable about their own practice for themselves. So how could we possibly trust them when it comes to practice for others? This is a time in which I need to take a cough drop. All right. So this is kind of it's interesting because it's almost the opposite of how I often think or see people thinking today of like, well, when someone else who has a stricter practice is concerned, I'm gonna be more strict for them. And the rabbis in the Mishnah are saying, if you're not holding down this practice for yourself, you can't actually be trusted to hold down the practice for other people. And in some sense, that makes a lot of sense. For example, if I'm not keeping a kosher kitchen for myself, how could I be expected to keep someone else's kitchen kosher? I don't hold that down. I don't have that build muscle memory of keeping a kosher kitchen in me. So of course I wouldn't be trusted to do that in someone else's kitchen. I don't have that talent. And then this gets into all sorts of questions like, well, what if I was raised in a kosher kitchen? Then I definitely know how to do it. But I think the assumption they're making about Am Haaretz is that they're not raised, we might, to put it in our terms, they weren't raised Orthodox, or they weren't raised observant. So it makes sense that if they're not holding down this practice of tithing when it comes to their own home, then they shouldn't be. Of course, we're not going to trust them to hold down our more strict observance for us. That does make sense. Why would someone of stricter observance rely on my practices to ensure their own adherence? Yeah, exactly. So we have this disagreement between Rabbi Yehuda and the majority of the sages about whether you can eat in someone else's home. And this is a little bit parallel in my mind to Well, I eat like non-kosher food out. Like it doesn't affect my kosher. It doesn't affect the kashrut of my kitchen. Um, but I'm not fully keeping kosher all the time. It's a little bit different because it's like, well, you just there's something inherent about the food that like you really just shouldn't eat it. It's like I keep a kosher kitchen, but I eat cheeseburgers out, which is I feel like another step beyond that. Like would erode potentially someone's trust in me if I said that to them. Okay, so again, this is all dealing with like in what ways do we like take demise seriously and lean on the stringent side? And this is like what does an Am Haaretz have to do to be considered like reliable enough when it comes to tithing that we don't have to hold by the stringency of D'mai for their produce. So we talked a little bit like why all the extra stringencies. I think it's like so that we can really trust them. They don't have this practice internalized. So we need to like make sure they're really fully holding by like the whole package in order to be able to trust them. So maybe I could say, we want the whole package. Why would someone want to become Ne'eman? Maybe, I'm just guessing here, maybe, and Bran, I'm curious to hear what you think. Maybe there are some of my Haaretz whose like social circles have become rabbinic, who's like not converting because they're Jewish, but like I don't know. They're like becoming more observant themselves, maybe. And that's why you would want to become Ne'eman. They're kind of like doing like a Baal Tshuva thing. It's not exactly the right language, but that kind of thing maybe is what's going on. Or another thought that I have is that their main customers are holding strictly by Ma'asrot, holding strictly by tithing. Or they think that there is like a market opportunity if they can sell like produce that is Ne'eman. They could sell it potentially to the rabbis for a higher price. If they're like, well, you don't have to tithe my produce, you can trust me, that might have like a certain amount of economic value. The appeal of reaching the level of those around them, like Jewish peer pressure. I kind of see that as like inside of like this thing that I improperly termed Baal Tshuva, like peer pressure. Yeah, that's cool. It's like, well, everybody else is doing it, so I should probably do it too. And I just want to like highlight. I think I've never tried to do this with produce, but I think it would be a real pain in the ass, basically, to do all these tithes. You have to do like the tithe for the Kohanim. You have to do 2% for the Kohanim. You have to do 10% of that for Avim. You have to save 10% for yourself to take to Jerusalem, or in an off year, you have to give 10% away to the poor. It's not 22% because it doesn't add up, but it's close to 22% of your income is being taxed. That's a lot. That's a lot. So like becoming an Ne'eman in this way, or not just what you sell, but even what you eat for yourself and everything you purchase has to be tithed properly, is like a big commitment. So the rabbis are really asking a lot of people here. On the other hand, this is the taxation system in the Torah. And on the third hand, given that like the rabbis are writing this during a time of Roman occupation in the land of Israel, and also exile to Bavel, the Torah system of taxation is not the only taxation system that is in place. They're also being taxed by the Romans. So on top of the 22, not exactly 22, 21 Torah percent, there's also like the Goyish Roman taxes that they have to be paying, and it could, add up to a lot of your income for the year. Which is not to say that, I think that we should be taxing ourselves less, but, how much are these Amei Haaretz getting in a time when the temple is in decline by giving, 10% of their food to Levim and 2% to Kohanim? How much service is actually being provided to them? That's another question I have, which is kind of outside of whether we should be, keeping the mitzvahs or not. It's sort of irrelevant. And I think, as far as I know, the Ma'asrot are not dependent on whether the temple is standing. It's just dependent on whether the produce is grown in the land. So on one level, it doesn't matter. And this is the halacha. But just stuff to think about, because this is so much about social dynamics and social situations. And responding to what people's actual relationship with these observances is, that you kind of have to keep that in mind at some level. Bran, I'm curious if you have any other thoughts, because other than that, I'm kind of I've gone as far as I have thoughts about this Mishnah. Oh, and just that I wanted to change this to this punctuation. Brand saying Torah taxation plus Roman taxation equals a ton of tithing. So then being trustworthy in doing this may ensure you can make enough to property tithe. Endless loops. So there's a wealth barrier to this. That's really interesting. In order to be able to do all of this tithing, the 20-ish% from the Torah, on top of whatever the Romans are taking, means you have to be pretty wealthy. Which is interesting. So if you're right to make that suggestion, then it just makes me think of how Rabbinic Judaism has had this problem of being an observant Jew is largely for wealthy Jews. Only accept there's an access barrier that's about wealth today that's a major problem in Judaism, and that is possibly something that has its roots as far back as the very beginning of Rabbinic Judaism. That's really cool. And there's that might not be exactly what you're saying. I'm not sure totally what you mean by endless loop. Being trustworthy means you make enough to tithe, which means Are you seeing if you are Ne'eman, then you can get more income by being able to sell to rabbinically observant Jews? And that means then you can afford to keep tithing, so that you can afford to keep being Ne'eman, and then you can that's kind of the if you can already afford to do this, then you're already inside. Maybe? Well, we can talk more about it one-on-one. So this is, and we're almost at 20 minutes, which I try to keep things under 20 minutes. So these are all of my thoughts about the second Mishnah of the second parak of Masechet D'mai. Brand says, yes, it assumes/requires wealth. Fascinating to see that this structural issue of wealth is kind of baked into Judaism. No, I know there's a delay. I programmed the delay. But maybe now that you're here, I can be responding to you faster. I can change that delay. Okay, so thank you all for watching. This is really cool and really exciting to be in conversation with someone who's watching in real time. If you're ever able to make it, I stream these at 9:30 every morning, and this will be for the rest of the week. So I really hope you can come. and check it out and be part of the conversation. As you can see, I'll actually talk to you and actually respond and actually put what you say in the text that's over here. Okay, this learning is Leilui Nishmat Lea Yocheved Bat Avraham V'Sara She'alcha Le'olama. And in general, the Learning at Tea for Torah is sponsored in memory of these beloved neshamas via Patreon. I will be back tomorrow for the third Mishnah of D'mai.